Hello everyone and welcome back to our shir in Dirshu Bahalacha. We are holding today on Tesvav Amud Aleph. We are in Siman Trough Membeis and we're beginning with Sif Ches. So yesterday we said at Sif Zayin, we spoke about the Batzek Shebesitke Areva. What happens when we have clumps of dough that are in the cracks of a kneading trough. So yesterday the Mechaber had said it depends. If you have a Kazayas B'Makom Echad, if you have a Kazayas of dough that's in one place in the Areva, then the Mechaber said you always have to be Mevaret. And the Berurah explained that when you have a Kazayis B'Makom Echad, it doesn't matter why the Batzek is there. Even if the Batzek is there to be Mechazek the Areva, even if the Areva has cracks and the dough is holding it together, so you might be tempted to say that the Batzek is bottled to the Areva. It can't be bottled because it's Kazayis B'Makom Echad and you have to be Mevaret. Then the Mechaber said, how about if you have less than a Kazayis B'Makom Echad? So then the Mechaber said it depends. If the reason the Batzek is there is to be Mechazik the Areva, if it's also Lechazik, so that the Batzek is acting either as an agent that's holding broken pieces of the Areva together, or it's patching up holes in the Areva, so then it becomes bottled to the Areva, and then you don't have to be Mevar these pieces of dough because they're less than a Kazayis, and they're also lechazik, so they're bottled to the areva. However, if they're not there to be mechazik the areva, if you just have clumps of dough that are less than a kazayas, and you have a bunch of them together in the areva, and together they add up to a kazayas, then you mechuyev to be mevar them, and we explained because the keli is mitzaref these pieces of batzek into a kazayas, and now we look at it that you have a kazayis b'makom echad, even though it's not really a kazayis b'makom echad, but since it's in the keli together, the keli is mitzaref it, and it makes it a kazayis b'makom echad. Now we go on to Sif Ches, which is a complicated sif, but let's see what the Mechaber says. Hayu boy shnei chatzoi zeisim. Let's say you have over here in this areva two clumps of dough, and each one is a half of a kazayis. So you have two pieces that are less than a kazayis. Together, they would equal a kazayis. Bishnei mekaimos. They're in two different places. V'chut shel batzek beinehem. But there happens to be a thread of dough that's connecting these two pieces of dough. So you have a half a kazayis of dough over here stuck on the areva. You have a half a kazayis of dough over here stuck onto the areva. But there's a thread of dough that's connecting the two pieces. So then we have to analyze the strength of that connecting piece of dough. If Rayim, we look at it, Kol she'ilu yinat elachut nitalin imai, if the fact is that if you would pull at this chut, if you would pull at this connecting thread of dough, these two clumps of dough would be pulled out together with the thread, chayiv levaer, then you have to go ahead and you have to be mevar this dough. Now, again, what are we saying over here? You have two chatzoi zeisim. They're connected by a thread of dough. If the thread is strong enough that if you would pull at that thread, you would pull out both chatzoi zeisim together, so then we look at it as one unit, and now you actually have a kazayis b'makom echad. So, even though, let's say these two clumps of dough were also lechazik. Let's say these two clumps of dough were put in there in order to repair or hold together the areva. So normally we would say, since it's also lechazik, since those pieces of dough are really, they should be bottled to the areva because they're also lechazik. So normally we say, if you have pieces that are less than a kazayas, and they're also lechazik, so they're bottled to the areva, and you don't have to be mevaret. That's what we saw yesterday in Sif Zayin. If you would have one whole kazayas, even if it's also lechazik, you have to be mevaret because a whole kazayas is not bottled. Over here, what the Mechaber is saying is, if you have two pieces, each one is less than a kazayas, right? Each one is less than a kazayas, and it's also lechazik. So normally you would say, since they're less than a kazayas and they're also lechazik, they're bottled to the areva and you don't have to be mevaret. But over here, since these two pieces are connected by a thread of dough, which is strong enough to pull out both pieces, over here, now we look at it that it's kazayis b'makom echad, and since it's a kazayis b'makom echad, even though it's also lechazik, you have to be mevaret. Ve'em lav, If, on the other hand, that connecting thread of dough is not strong enough that if you would pull it out, you would pull out the 2 pieces of dough, then einoy tzarich levar, then you don't have to be mevarid. If they're also lechazik. If they're not also lechazik, then we saw yesterday in Siv Zayin, you have a half a kazayas over here and a half a kazayas over here, and they're not also lechazik, they're not there to repair the areva. You have to be mevarid anyway. Why? Because the kli is mitzaref the 2 pieces, and it's considered a kazayas b'makom echad. You got to get rid of it. The chiddush over here that the Mechaber is saying is, you have 2 pieces that are each less than a kazayas. They're also lechazik. Normally, we would say 2 pieces, each one is less than a kazayas, so they're not choshev by themselves. They're also lechazik, so they're bottled to the areva, so you don't have to be mevar them. But over here, if that connecting thread of dough is strong enough so that if you would pull it out, you would pull out both pieces together, that thread is mitzaref the 2 clumps of dough. It's considered a kazayas b'makom echad, and even though it's also lechazik, since it's a kazayas b'makom echad, it can't be bottled, so you have to be mevar. If the connecting piece of thread is not strong enough, so then it's not mitzaref the 2 pieces. If it's not mitzaref the 2 pieces, so then if those pieces are also lechazik, if they're there to repair the areva, so since each one is less than a kazayas, and we don't consider them to be connected, they're each bottled to the areva, and you don't have to be mevar. That's what the Mechaber says over here. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah ois katan lamed daled. Kol she'ilu yinatal achut. If the fact is that if you would pull at this connecting thread, you would pull out both pieces, tahaya hachut of, that this interconnecting thread is thick and it's substantial, val kain hu mitzarfan. Therefore, it serves to connect the 2 pieces. V'hevi kazayis b'makom echad. Since the 2 pieces are connected, even though each one is a half a zayis, since they're connected by this substantial thread, now it's considered a kazayis b'makom echad. V'lachein eina moyel afilu ayase lechazik. And therefore, even if those pieces are also lechazik, doesn't matter. It's not bottled to the areva because it's a kazayis. A kazayis is chashuv. It's not bottled to the areva, and you have to be mevarid. Ois katan lamed hey. Einoy tzarich levar. If the interconnecting piece is not substantial and it can't serve to link the 2 pieces, because if you pull at it, it'll break. It will not pull out the 2 half zaysim together. Then einoy tzarich levar. Then you don't have to be mevarid. Why don't you have to be mevarid? Because they're also lechazik. They're each less than a kazayas, so they're mevatel, the bottle to the areva. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'dafka b'shahayu b'makom also lechazik areva. Obviously, this is only true that you don't have to be mevarid if those 2 chatzai zaysim, if those 2 pieces that are each a half of kazayas are also lechazik, that they're there to repair the areva. The ilavachi, because if they're not there to repair the areva, if it's just an areva and you happen to have a clump of dough here and you happen to have a clump of dough here, and they're each less than a kazayas, hakli mitzarfan, the areva, the keli, would be mitzarif those 2 pieces of dough into a kazayas. It would be a kazayas b'makom echad, and you would have to be mevarid. Okay. So far, we have said over here what the din of an areva is. And to encapsulate the din of an areva, the din of areva is if you have clumps of dough in an areva, even if each one of those clumps of dough are less than a kazayas, so you just have this areva and you have little pieces of dough floating all over the areva, the keli is mitzaref all of those pieces of dough, and if you have enough dough there that when combined it would equal a kazayas, you have to be mevar all of those pieces of dough because the keli is mitzaref them. If you have one singular piece of dough that is a kazayas, then you have to be mevarid, even if that piece of dough is there lechazek ha'areva. Even if it's there to repair the areva, it doesn't matter. It's not bottled to the areva because it's a kazayas, so it's not bottled to the areva. If you have pieces that are less than a kazayas, you have 2 pieces, each one is a half of a kazayas, and they're connected by a thread. So now it depends. If the thread is substantial enough that it combines it into a kazayas, well, then you have to be mevarid, even if it's also lechazik, because it's a kazayas b'makom echad. So even if it's also lechazik, you have to be mevarid. If the thread of dough is not substantial and it can't serve as a vehicle to connect the 2 clumps of dough, because if you pull at it, it'll rip and it won't connect them, So then, if it's also lechazek, if those two pieces are there to be mechazek the areva, so it's two pieces, each one less than a kazayis, it's there to be mechazek the areva, so it's less than a kazayis, it's not choshev, and it's there to be mechazek the areva, so it's bottled to the areva, and you don't have to be mevaret. That's the din of an areva. Now we come to the hard part of the mechaber. Ba'med dvarim amurim. When is this true? Ba'areva. This is true by an areva. Now, what's true by an areva? What's true by an areva is that by an areva, if the keli can't be mitzaref the pieces of dough, in an areva we say that when you have a case where the areva is not going to be mitzaref these separate pieces of dough, when is that true? When do we say that an areva, when do we say that if you have little pieces of dough in an areva, the areva is not mitzaref them, it doesn't combine them to make them a kazayis b'makam echad? We say that when it's also lechazek, right? When you have an areva and you have little pieces of dough and each one is stuck into a crack to be mechazek the areva, then we do not say that the areva combines all of those pieces of dough into a kazayis, because they're also lechazek. If they're not also lechazek, then the areva is mitzaref them into a kazayis and you have a problem. But by an areva, when we do not say that the areva is mitzaref the pieces of dough, and when is that? When they're also lechazek. So when they're also lechazek, we do not say that it combines them into a kazayis. Then we have a new din. We have a din that if you have a chut, if you have a thread that's connecting two pieces, if that thread is substantial, it serves to connect the two pieces, and therefore, even though the two little pieces are also lechazek, it becomes a kazayis b'makam echad, and you have a problem. That's a din that we say by an areva. So by an areva, there's a din that a chut will serve to be mitzaref two pieces and make it into a kazayis. But if there's no chut, they're there and they're also lechazik, we see them as separate pieces and they're not a problem. Ba'medvar amurim ba'areva. Avol b'bayis, but by a house, we have a different din. Avol b'bayis. Let's say you have a house and you have pieces of dough laying around on the floor in the house. So the pieces of dough are not laying around in an areva, they're laying around in a house. Avol b'bayis. Let's say you have laying on the floor of the house, you have two clumps of dough, and each one is less than a kazayis, and they happen to be connected by a thread, and the thread is insubstantial. The thread does not serve to connect them, because if you pull at that thread, it'll break. Or indeed, even if there's no thread, there doesn't have to be a thread at all. You just have a half a kazayis clump over here, and you have a half a kazayis clump over here. Chayev leva'er, you still have to be mevar this dough. You still have to get rid of these two clumps of dough. So let's get clear what the mechaber is saying over here. The mechaber is drawing a differentiation between the din of an areva and the din of a house. The din of an areva is an areva can be mitzaref all the pieces of dough that are in it, because it's a keli. A keli is a container. The purpose of a container is to contain the things that are in it into one unit. So by an areva, we say, if you have little clumps of dough in an areva, the keli is mitzaref all of them into one kazayis. That's one din we say by an areva. Now we're not going to say that din by a house. A house is not a container for pieces of dough. So according to most, when by a house, we're not going to say automatically that when you have a clump of dough laying on the floor over there and another clump of dough laying on the floor over here, that somehow the bias is mitzaref them. The bias is not mitzaref them. It's a piece of dough on the floor over there, and it's a piece of dough on the floor over there. So by an areva, the areva could be mitzaref the little pieces of dough into one. By a house, the house is not mitzaref the little pieces of dough into one. That's one thing. Second, by an areva, we have this concept that when the areva is not able to combine two pieces of dough, and we said when is that? When they're also lechazek, when the two little itty bitty pieces of dough are there to repair the areva, so then we don't say that the areva combines them into one kazayas. Why? because now they're bottled to the areva. Now we don't even look at them as little individual pieces of dough. Now we look at them as pieces of the areva. They're part of the bowl. They're not dough. In that case, we say that if there's a thread, we need the thread to combine them. If there's a thread, then even though they're also lechazik, they combined into a kazayis. By a house, we're not going to come on to that svara. By a house, we don't need that svara, because by a house, we have a different svara. What's the svara by a house? Let's see what the Mechaber says. Aval babayis, afal pisha iminot alachot ein netalanimai. Even if they would be connected by a thread, but the thread is not strong, or even if there's no thread at all, chayiv levar, you still have to be mevar these little pieces of dough. Now, I just told you, wait a second, why do you have to be mevar them? The house isn't mitzaref them. An areva could be mitzaref them, but the house is not mitzaref them. And a chut, there's no chut here to be mitzaref them. So what's being mitzaref them? Why do you have to be mevar these little clumps of dough that are laying on the floor of the house? Says the Mechaber, mipnei shepa'amim mekabei tzoisam. Because by a house we have a different svara. Because by a house you take a broom and you sweep up everything that's on the floor. Now, when you sweep up everything that's on the floor, what are you doing? You're combining everything into a makam echad. And especially if you have moist pieces of dough, so when you take the broom and you sweep everything up and you shovel it up into the dustpan, they're going to get scrunched together, and now you very likely will end up with a kizayis from makam echad. So that's a new problem. So again, we're contrasting the din of the areva to the din of the house. Basically, what the Mechaber is telling you, there are different svaras at work over here. By an areva, we have one set of svaras. By a house, we have a different set of svaras. The set of svaras that we have by an areva is twofold. First of all, an areva, because it's a keli, it has the ability to be mitzaref little pieces of dough that are laying in it into one piece. Because a keli is a container that's made to contain what's in it into one unit. So if you have a crumb that's a quarter of a kazayis of dough over here, and you have a crumb that's a quarter of a kazayis over here, and a crumb that's a quarter of a kazayis here, and a fourth one that's a quarter of a kazayis over here, even though they're all disparate and they're not connected at all, the keli is mitzaref them, because the keli is a container. We don't say that by a house. A house is not mitzaref what's in it to be one unit. So there could be a quarter of a kazayis on the floor there, a quarter of a kazayis on the floor there, a quarter of a so on and so on. We don't say that the bias is magically mitzaref them into one. So that's one contrast that really goes lekula. That by a house, the house is not mitzaref to pieces of dough the way a keli is. Also, by an areva, we have a svara that by an areva will say that when the two pieces of dough that are each less than a kazayis are stuck onto the areva and they're also lechazek, if there's an interconnecting piece, we're going to come on to that to connect the two pieces. By a house, we don't need that svara, because by a house, there's a different svara l'chumra. We just said this svara l'chumra by an areva. By an areva, we said there's a svara l'chumra, which is if there's an interconnecting thread of dough, if it's substantial, it'll connect two pieces of dough and make it a kizayis b'makam echad, even if it's also l'chazek. That's a svara l'chumra. We don't need to come on to that svara l'chumra by a house, because by a house we have a different svara l'chumra. What's the svara l'chumra by a house? If you have a piece of dough there and a piece of dough there and a piece of dough there, you might sweep it up and it might become one kazayis. So by a house, even if you have little pieces of dough scattered around, they're automatically you have to be mevar them, not because the house is mitzaref them, but because we're afraid you might sweep them up together. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says in Ois Katan Lamed Vav, Shapa'amim mekabei tzoisam. Because in a house, sometimes you're going to combine the little pieces of dough, be'esha mechabed abayis, when you sweep up the house. Ve'hevi b'makam echad. So that's going to have a din of being b'makam echad. Now, if you take a look at Sharet Tzia and Ois Katan Samach, you'll see a little bit of what I spoke out outside over here. Says the Sharet Tzia and Ois Katan Samach, Va'afte b'bayis einoi asoi l'chazek, even though in the house, we're not talking about where these pieces of dough are there to be mechazik the house. So what the Chavetz Chaim is saying is, I don't understand. By an areva, we said you have to come on to this interconnecting thread that's connecting the two chatzoi zeisim. We have to come on to that svara l'chumra to connect them. Why do we need that svara l'chumra? Because The keli can't be mitzaref those two pieces in this case because those two pieces are also lechazik. And we said that by an areva, when clumps of dough are there to be mechazik the areva, then the keli is not mitzaref them because they're bottled to the keli. So we had to come on to the svara by the areva of the interconnecting thread. But by a house, what? By a house, these pieces of dough are not also lechazik. So why do we need this new svara that we're afraid that you're going to sweep them up and combine them into a kazayas? Why do we have to come on to that svara? Why don't we just say that the bias is mitzaref them? So we don't need a new svara that you're going to sweep it up. Why don't we just say they're not also lechazik? So just like by an areva, if you have 100 little tiny crumbs of dough, but they're not there to be mechazik the areva, we said the keli is mitzaref them. So why don't we say by the house, if you have a bunch of crumbs of dough on the floor, why don't we say that the bias is mitzaref them? Says the Sharitzion, v'afta b'bayis eino yosel lechazik. So it seems that we don't need this svara. Afilo hachi ilav taimish ayidei kibud miskabes lo yachayev levar. Without this svara, that you might sweep them up and combine them, you wouldn't be chayiv to be mevar this chametz. The kol chatzi zayis oime b'ftayatzmai babayis. Because like I told you before, we don't say that a house is mitzaref the pieces that are on the floor. A keli is a container. It contains what's in it into one unit. But by a house, we don't say that. Valeka time of the tziruf, so there would be no reason to combine the pieces of dough that are in the house like we do by a keli, where we say the keli is mitzarefet. So that's the contrast between the areva and the bias. By the areva it automatically combines what's in it. By the house, we don't say that svara. So by the house, we need a new svara. By the house, the svara l'chumra is that you might sweep them up and make one kazayas out of it. Okay. Now, says the Mechaber, something that the Mishnah Berurah is going to have a very hard time with, and ultimately the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharitzion is going to say that the lashon of the Mechaber is megumgum ktsas, that something doesn't sit well over here. But let's see what the Mechaber says. Okay, 3 lines from the bottom. A new case. Hayachatzi zayis babayis v'chatzi zayis ba'aliyah. Let's say we don't have a half a kazayis on the floor on the left of the kitchen, and another half of kazayas of dough on the floor on the right side of the kitchen. Let's say we have a half of a kazayas on the floor in the kitchen on the first floor, and you have another half of kazayas on the third floor on the floor. Or chatzi zayis babayis v'chatzi zayis b'achsadra. Or let's say you have a half a zayis on the floor in the house, and you have another half a zayis in the portico, in the entranceway, in the little porch on the front. Chatzi zayis babayis v'chatzi zayis babayis shelafnim mimenu. Or you have a half a zayis on the floor over here, and another half a zayis in the apartment. Hayil ve'elu achatzoi zeisim devukim baksalim oy bakayrois oy bakarkois einoi chayev levayer. Says the Mechaber, since these pieces of dough are stuck in different areas of the house, you don't have to be mevayer. Now, I'm going to tell you pshat in this Mechaber first, according to the Yesh Omrim that's brought down in the Mishnah Berurah. Basically, in the Yesh Omrim, which they say he's basing on the Rush, the way the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain this Mechaber is he's going to say like this. I just finished telling you that the svara l'chumra by a house is that if you have a half a kazayas of dough over here and a half a kazayas of dough over here, you have to be mevayer it because you might sweep it together and make one kazayas out of it. That's why you have to be mevayer it. Therefore, says the Mechaber, if you have a half a kazayas on the floor on the first floor and a half a kazayas on the floor on the second floor, there doesn't seem to be room for a chashash that you might sweep them together, and therefore you don't have to be mevayer them. That's the way the Mishnah Berurah learns according to the Yesh Omrim. However, what doesn't sit well in the lashon of the Mechaber is that, strictly speaking, not what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber says the reason you don't have a problem over here is because these half of kazesim, these fractional kazesim, are devukim baksalim oy bakayrois oy bakarkois. They're stuck onto the walls, or onto the beams, or onto the floor. That's why you don't have to be mevayer them. What the Mechaber seems to be saying over here is that since these pieces of dough are stuck to the house, it's as if they're asoy lechazek, and since they're also lechazek, the bottle to the house. Now the problem is that we just finished saying before that by a house we don't have the svara of asir lechazik. By an areva we say that if the pieces of dough are asir lechazik, then the bottle to the house, but then the bottle to the areva. But by the house we said we don't have to be talking about where they're asir lechazik. So the Mishnah Berurah struggles with this. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Lamed Zayin Devukim. Ritzayno loymar begumay sheyesh ben. What the Mechaber seems to be saying is that these pieces of dough are smushed into the cracks in the house. Why? Kedei lahashvaisan, to level them out. The heavy kimoy asir lechazek. So these pieces of dough are bottled to the house because they're like the pieces of dough that are in the areva that are asir lechazik, that are there to repair the areva. So just like by the areva they're bottled to the areva, by the house they're bottled to the house. So you don't have to be mevar unless there's a kezayis b'makam echad. Now, the problem by that is that we said that by the house you don't have to come on to that svara. Because by the house, even if they're not there to be mechazek, the house can't be mitzaref of them. Because the house isn't mitzaref what's in it into one unit. By the areva, we need the svara of asir lechazek so that the dough should be bottled to the areva, so that the areva shouldn't combine them. If the dough is not bottled to the areva, then the areva combines the little pieces of dough into one kezayis. But by the house, we said we don't have to come on to that svara, because we said that a house is not mitzaref. Now the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying, now the Mechaber seems to be saying that we do need the svara of asir lechazik by a house. So that's why if you take a look in the Sha'ar Tzion in Ois Katan Samach Aleph, he says, Umikam Makam, a few lines into the Sha'ar Tzion, Umikam Makam Divrei Mechaber Begumgum Tzas. The lashon of the Mechaber is difficult to understand. The Besif Yod Aleph Hetik Shitas Harimi Parish Ta'atamu Mishum Tserif Keli. Later on, the Mechaber is going to say that the reason we have to come on to asir lechazek by an areva is because otherwise the areva is mitzaref whatever's in it. Umemelu the babayis to loy shaykh tziruf, but by a house where we say a house is not mitzaref what's in it into one piece, kedisa b'Yerushalmi avi agra, like we know from the Yerushalmi that's brought in the bir agra, afilo einan devukim ein tzarich levayer. So even if it's not asir lechazek, even if these pieces of dough are not stuck into the cracks of the house, you don't have to be mevayer them because they're individual pieces that are each less than a kezayis, and the house is not mitzaref it. So therefore, the Mishnah Berurah brings down the second line from the bottom of Yeshayimrim, and he says, "V'yeshayimrim da afilu ein dvukim ein tzarich levayer." There are those Rishonim, and in the Sha'ar Tzion he bases this on a rush, who say that even if the pieces of dough are not stuck into the cracks of the house, so they're not there lechazek, you don't have to be mevar them. Why? V'loy chayshinan bazeh sheyiskaptzu b'makam echad. Because when one piece is on the first floor and one piece is on the second floor, we're not chayshish that you're going to sweep them up together. But everybody would agree that these little pieces of dough, you do have to be mevatel them belev. If you didn't do bittel before the zman iser, so you no longer could do bittel because they're not yours, tzarich levar achakach, you would have to be mevar them later. Okay. The Mechaber, we just finished off the Sif Ches over here on the top line of Tesvav and Beis. El mevatel belibay v'daya. You're not mechuyev to be mevar these pieces, but you should be mevatel them belev. Ois kat lamed ches mevatel belibay v'daya. The zeu ba'aya b'gemara, because this is a shaila in the Gemara im mitztarfen. If these little pieces of dough, if we consider them to be combined into one, v'lachein kemet shebitel. But now, once you do bittel, achakach v'leisfeked rabbanan ve'in tzarich livdoi. Let's remember, once you do bittel, now all you have is a suffix rabbanon, because we said all the way in the beginning over here by Hilchos Bedika, we said that midar raisa, all you really need is bittel. Once you do bittel, you don't need bedika. Once you mevatel your chametz belev, you don't need beer, you don't have to get it out, you don't have to do bedika, you don't have to do anything. You mevatel it belev, it's not yours anymore. We said midar rabbanon, you need bedika and you need beer because we're afraid shema masa geluska yafeh. We're afraid you might find some tempting chametz on Pesach v'shem yavel la'achlay. So once you did bittul, you already took care of the daraisa. Now you only have a suffix d'Rabbanan. Once you have a suffix d'Rabbanan, we could go l'kula, and we could say that you don't have a problem over here. Okay, we'll stop over here. And Mirz Hashem, I know I didn't get to prepare a share yesterday and record a share yesterday, but hopefully we'll have a share on Sunday. Be well. See you all next week.